Well, ladies, we have another hot topic today, fresh out of Hollywood, but yet we're going to focus on the book today. And it all starts with, or it ends with us, the book by Colleen Hoover, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But welcome to another episode of Message from Mom, where we're busting the myth that mothers-in-law aren't necessarily monsters-in-law. And ladies, let's lift our glasses and a toast.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
All right. And I have my lovely co-hosts who happen to be my daughters-in-law, and I have Kelly to the left of me.
Hi, I'm Kelly, and I'm married to Beth's oldest son, Alex.
And Chelsea to the right of me.
Hi, I'm Chelsea, and I'm married to Beth's middle son, Andrew.
So before we dive in, I like to just have a little message from Mom. So since we are talking about a book today, I just wanted to share why is reading so important. And this is what I drew from the internet. That's where I know I Google a lot of our topics, but really, reading is a lifelong skill that improves memory, builds a robust vocabulary and foundation of knowledge, and adds a richness and depth of meaning to life for all those who can access true, deep comprehension. Wow. So it's a very important skill to develop. And honestly, I just have such fond memories and vivid memories of going off to the library with my mom. And it really was, it was just the girls' day out. So no brothers were attached to this. So we would go up, especially in the summertime when I was off, and we would just go to the library. And I could just remember just looking at stacks and stacks of books and just breathing in the ink. And it was just all a very intoxicating experience, even as a young girl. And so then that's when I read like the Boxcar Children, and I remember the Sue Barton Nurse series and Nancy Drew. And then even in the 5th grade, I'll never forget. And then I shared this book series with the boys when they were growing up. But I had a 5th grade teacher that read The Hobbit to us, and she would read one chapter every week. And so we were just mesmerized, for the entire semester, because it took a while to get through that book. So, and also too, it was very important to me to read to the boys.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember vividly sitting down with AJ, and then we would read Goodnight Moon and asking him when he was 1, to point to the things that the bunny was saying goodnight to. Andrew absolutely loved the Berenstain Bear book series, so much so that I didn't think I could actually read one more Berenstain Bear book. And then Christian really loved the Peter Rabbit series.
Mm-hmm.
And I had made his room was decorated in Peter Rabbit, so I think that's why I really focused on that series with him. And then he even had a Peter Rabbit quilt.
Mm-hmm.
So reading is very important to me. I'm sure it's very important to you. We talk about books a lot. So I thought it'd be very fun to have a podcast, and maybe we'll turn this into a little bit of a series where we discuss a book. And I actually listen to a lot of my books nowadays rather than read them. I'm getting older, so font size for the books are a little challenging sometimes. They're a little bit too small. Kindles are great because then you can enlarge the font size, but I love to listen to books. So when I was over on Audible, I saw this book. I'd never heard of Colleen Hoover before.
Really?
Even though you had actually I had, because you had recommended one of her
Verity.
books. Yes, Verity.
Which was great, but a lot of people actually say that. They're like, this seems like not something that Colleen Hoover would write, and I would agree compared to this. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, she's good.
Yeah.
In some things.
So anyway, I was just over there, but it was really just right on the front page because the movie was soon to be released,
right?
Which is It Ends With Us. So it stars Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and Brandon Sklenar, I believe is how you pronounce that. So anyway, and the movie's really getting a lot of attention, and we will touch on that, but at the end of the podcast, because we're just going to jump in and talk about the book. And as I said, this was my first entree to Colleen Hoover. And Chelsea, you may be able to verify this or not, but I heard through the media grapevine or the social media grapevine that Colleen Hoover came to prominence with the TikTok book club. Do you know anything about that? Because that's where I guess.
Like maybe people are just
TikTokers
really presenting her work a lot on TikTok.
Yep.
I have seen several TikToks that people do kind of present her work and talk about her. But I don't know if I remember seeing it prior to this particular book and movie though. So I feel like maybe it's more of a recent thing.
Okay. It could be. I mean, I don't know, but when I was just out there doing a little bit of a deep dive,
I'm sure,
that came to my attention that I guess TikTok has a lot of book clubbers or a book club, and so TikTokers will talk about books over there.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I thought that was very interesting. But we will get into this book. So this is a book that actually touches on a very sensitive topic, and that is domestic violence. So, and I think that's why the movie is really getting a lot of buzz, because perhaps that didn't translate as well over there, but it could be a very challenging. I mean, books are very hard to adapt, I think, into movies sometimes. But anyway, but let's get going with the book, because I actually overall I really liked it. I mean, it's not like absolutely stellar writing. I mean,
very entertaining book.
But yes, but it's a book. I mean, it flows, it goes, and I was actually very impressed with Colleen Hoover tackling this very sensitive subject, because I truly believe that the book portrayed it sensitively. So, but anyway, so I'm going to kick it off. So we have these book club questions. So I've always been in a book club, and so I always go to the Princeton Review, and then you can share their questions. So we took several of their questions, and so that's how we're gonna talk about this book. So this is a story of domestic abuse and patterns that start during childhood. Lily, and that is the protagonist. So it's Lily Bloom is the protagonist, and Lily, determined not to follow in her mother's footsteps, makes the same mistake and ends up in an abusive relationship. How did you feel about this? Were you frustrated with her, or did you understand and have compassion? Did your viewpoint change throughout the book? So I'm gonna just throw that up, ladies, and we can just all just jump right in. So, first of all, we can just talk about, so Lily's mother. Well, Lily did watch her mother and her father be in an abusive relationship her entire growing up years. So
so I think the interesting thing about, I think what Colleen Hoover does well in this book is give, she uses flashback really well, which is helpful. So the protagonist, Lily Bloom, is in her early 20s when we start to get to know her in the book, and then she's flashing back to her teenage years and what her life was like, right? So she's coming off of having this experience of seeing her father abuse her mother and having these feelings toward her mother of like, how could you stay with a person that would do this to you? So building up over her entire teenage years and childhood are these feelings of resentment toward her mom for not getting out of the relationship and not maybe putting Lily first and saving them from the situation. We do learn that the father is a prominent member of society. I think he's the mayor of their small Maine town. So, there's a lot of appearances that need keeping up, right? From the mother's perspective.
That's right.
Which we never really dive into, but we can kind of get that from how Lily talks about their stature in their community and everything like that. And so it's not only this sort of horrible experience at home that she has memories of and has experienced, but also I think what it can be just as scarring is the idea growing up that you have this major secret to keep in your town. Like when you live in a small town, you can't hide these things, right? And Lily Bloom talks about how her father was always careful not to hit her mom in the face so that she could go out in public and not it be obvious, right? So all of these secrets, in addition to actually witnessing the abuse, are hugely scarring, I think, moments for Lily. And so she builds up this these feelings of resentment towards her mom for never leaving. And I think the book does a really great job of building that up to the point where when Lily finds herself in an abusive relationship, she's really mad at herself, right? Because she's mad at her mom for that whole lifetime of, bad feelings and resentment, but then she's mad at herself for falling into the same trap, right? How could this happen? How could I let this happen to myself?
Right.
Yeah.
I think you do have, I had compassion towards her character for that reason, just because, as you're reading the book and you're going along and you're going back and forth from the flashback to the present day, And then even in certain instances where it almost seems or is made to seem like maybe the abuse that happened was not a mistake, but
An accident
an
or something.
accident.
Yeah.
Oh, this didn't actually happen. It
Mhm.
happened this way.
Mhm.
So you do have some sense of compassion, or at least I did, just because, I mean, if someone is made to feel like it was an accident, then,
Mhm.
how would you not have compassion
Yeah.
Mhm.
towards them?
Mhm.
Yeah, and especially so when we get into these moments where Lily is experiencing her own, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, but
Mhm.
um she has when she's in her own system of abuse with her boyfriend, she's waking up from being knocked unconscious, right? And then you
Yeah.
have someone telling you that you tripped and fell and things like
Right.
this, right? We don't necessarily know from what the author tells us in the flashbacks that Lily's mother had that same experience, but we can ultimately assume that because of their prominence in the community, there was this sense of like, this somehow must be my part of my fault, or I must have somehow caused,
Mhm.
what happened.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good point to bring up because I think that's how a lot of abuse victims feel,
Yeah.
that it's their fault, that
Yeah.
they triggered the situation or somehow
Well,
they
and Lily's
were
character as
involved.
a teenager
Mhm.
talks about that
Mhm.
actually, because and the way that she talks about it, I felt like was very realistic because I've actually I've experienced a lot of the same things that Lily experiences in her childhood, and one of the things I think that or you learn to know when you're growing up in that situation is that if the abuser is set off, they come home from work and you can tell that they're in a bad mood or something, and
Right.
you know
Mhm.
then that anything will set them off. And I think
Right.
Colleen Hoover does a really great job of establishing Lily's character as understanding that from a very young age, like
Mhm.
Mhm.
realizing like if
What
everything
would
isn't
trigger him?
if
Yes.
everything's not perfect when he gets home from
Yes.
work, like, and you don't want to have any interaction with that person because you're
Right.
afraid that
Mhm.
you'll say the wrong
You
thing,
avoid.
right? So it's a weird pattern that you learn in
Absolutely.
terms of how to deal with someone, and those
Mhm.
feelings of, well, I shouldn't have said that, this is my fault kind of
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
That's where those guilt feelings really
Mhm.
start to come from.
So, were you frustrated with Lily, or did you understand and have compassion? So, Chelsea, you already said you had compassion for her.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be frustrated, I think. I mean, I've never been in a domestic abuse relationship and I never grew up with domestic violence in my household. But I think that even it's how can you be frustrated with someone that, I mean, even if they don't leave the situation,
Mhm.
I mean, I guess you can in the sense of you're like, okay, just leave. Why aren't
Right.
you leaving?
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, I think you do have to have some sort of compassion because there's obviously a reason that they're staying.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think she really like towards the end of the book gets to that where she's like,
Mhm.
wow, she has this big epiphany of, I understand why my mom stayed,
Mhm.
like I get it because
Yeah.
she obviously was so in love with my dad and she had a kid and
Mhm.
just a multitude of things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, did your viewpoint change throughout the book about Lily?
Personally, no, I don't think so. I think that it's hard to feel frustrated, and I think again Colleen Hoover does a really good job of establishing why Lily herself was frustrated,
Mhm.
so that when you get to Lily being in the same situation that her mom was in, you don't necessarily feel frustrated with her because you know that she's frustrated with herself,
Mhm.
right? So that's an
Hmm.
identifiable sort of trait in this character.
Right.
So I feel like, if it went on, with no resolution, obviously there's some element of frustration as the reader that you would have. But because
Mhm.
she does get to a point of resolution in Chelsea, like you said, I think she was never going to be able to get over it and move past it and make better choices for herself if she hadn't come to terms with what her mom herself and get over her resentment feelings toward her
Yeah.
mom, right?
Mhm.
So when she realizes, oh, this is what my mom felt like, I totally get it. Like that was somehow a way for her to let go
Hmm.
of what she was dealing with in her own life and move
Mhm.
Yeah.
past it and make a different choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so let's move on to the other protagonist in this
Mhm.
book, and that's Ryle. Or actually, there are three, I will say, but we'll introduce Ryle first. And Lily is introduced to Ryle and early on in the book. And so her first encounter with him, we do see it's kind of interesting because they call that foreshadowing in books. So we see Ryle's very angry and he's kicking a chair.
Mhm.
So you're probably not thinking about that
No.
at that point in the book, but so Ryle is a neurosurgeon that Lily meets just by chance, and then as the book progresses, then they fall in love. So, but we also see that Ryle suffered a tragic trauma as a child. So, do you think this was justification for his bad behavior towards Lily?
Well, Colleen Hoover does a really another interesting thing here in that she doesn't reveal this fact until after we've already seen him be violent towards his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is interesting because it gives us as the reader a sense of getting to know Ryle in a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then our feelings about him are maybe unraveled a little bit, or
Mm-hmm.
because we learn this thing about him.
Yes.
We can, as the reader, have the option to sort of understand, like, oh, I get it. And is she,
Mhm.
is the writer or is the situation blaming his bad behavior on this incident?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not totally sure necessarily, and I don't know that you ever really feel that way from what we learn in the book, though it is pretty unexplained as far as like
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't maybe necessarily recognize that this traumatic experience is what has given him these anger management issues. But by the time we learn that, we've already learned as the reader that he's violent.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I don't know that that necessarily is a good thing or a bad thing, but it does give you you do have a preconceived idea of who he is before we learn that
Mm-hmm.
traumatic
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
experience.
she also foreshadows that very early on as well, which was interesting, like the actual traumatic experience
Yes.
that he encountered.
Yes.
Which I thought was interesting because then, when she finally did make the big reveal, you were like,
Yes.
Yeah.
oh,
Yes.
okay.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
kind of tied everything in, but I don't think it justifies the behavior that he had
No.
towards Lily, but I
No.
think that that gives you more compassion
Mm-hmm.
towards him.
I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. And I think Colleen Hoover, she did do a great job with foreshadowing in this book. I did like her foreshadowing and I liked her flashbacks. So I'll give her snaps for that. But she foreshadowed. So Ryle was in a tragic accident with a gun with his brother, and he accidentally shot his brother and his younger sister. I think she was still too young. She wasn't like in the room or anything like that. So
Mm-mm.
that's the uh, tragic episode in his life that's revealed probably about halfway through. They're already married, I believe. Are they married?
I
I can't
can't remember
remember.
if they're married or not, but they're quite
They're
far along in
they're
their
quite
relationship.
far along in their relationship. And then also too, I do want to bring up Lily is best friends with Ryle's sister,
Yeah.
Alyssa.
Yeah.
So, and she plays a pivotal role, or at least for me, she played a pivotal role because Lily not only is involved with Ryle, but best friends with Ryle's sister, who seemingly has a very normal, stable misdemeanor. Or misdemeanor.
Demeanor.
Demeanor, not misdemeanors. Yeah, it's early in the morning. So,
She's
yes,
committed no
demeanor.
crimes.
Yeah, demeanor. Yeah, no crimes have been committed. So, I would be thinking about that. So, going back, towards my feelings with Ryle, I had a lot of compassion for him. I did throughout the whole book. And part of it was because we were introduced to his parents and we were introduced to his sister. And they all seemed, as I said, to be very stable people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that, because usually, or my understanding of domestic violence is it's a repeated behavior that's passed on. So we see that actually with Lily. So Lily's mother was abused. So it is somewhat, and I'll put it in air quotes, normal for her to be in that abusive relationship too, because we act on learned experiences. So it doesn't look as if Ryle had that pattern with his parents. So for me, anyway, it gave me more compassion towards him.
Right.
So I didn't, I was really kind of rooting for him. And maybe that's where a lot of domestic violence women that really are in a a very, I mean, it's not a good situation. Listen, I'm not condoning domestic violence at all, but I do think that we can draw some hard and fast lines when it comes to it. And I think that this book, that's why I really like the book, because I think it really did uh, bring in some layers to it. That it's a very complex situation, and it's not cut and dry, and it's not black and white.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, I think that was another one of the interesting things, like learning about the experience that he had when he was a boy and killing his brother accidentally. That Colleen Hoover does well, in that she establishes a friendship between. So, kind of, let's take us back. So Lily meets Ryle by chance, but they never see each other again for many, many months. In the meanwhile, Lily starts her own company and hires a woman named Alyssa as her, not necessarily partner, but as a worker in her flower shop that she's building, right? And it's on another chance moment where Alyssa's brother comes to the flower shop, and Lily realizes that it's the man Ryle that she had met on the rooftop several months before.
that's right.
So by this point, she doesn't have like a serious long-term friendship with Alyssa. However, they are fast friends, and you can tell that they really do like each other, and they just develop their friendship over time. And that, I think, is one of the most interesting parts of the whole book, is how do you maintain a good girlfriendship with someone who is related to someone who is hurting you. It's a very interesting dichotomy that I think Colleen Hoover does a really, she does a good job kind of navigating what that looks like. And I don't think it necessarily looks the same with all characters in all situations, but she did carve out this Alyssa character in a way that really makes her feel like, you know, someone that you can really trust. And so you develop these feelings for her in the book, where she's not the protagonist, but she does play such a huge part in Lily's navigation of her relationship with Ryle, but also just her life as an adult and a small business owner, and all of these things that are central to her existence.
I think too, I feel like you would assume that Alyssa would only be on Ryle's side, you know? And I mean, I guess, you know, you would assume that because they're family and, oh, that's his sister. So even, you know, once Alyssa maybe finds out about, you know, this domestic abuse, you would assume, oh, you know, please take him back. Like, she's going to beg for that.
Right.
And I mean, I thought it was really interesting that she kind of allowed Alyssa to go the other way as well, you know, where she was like, well, you know, like, if you do, then I'm not going to be your friend.
That's right. Yes. And that was a pivotal, we're kind of jumping, you know, towards the end, but that's okay. We're discussing a book here, so there's no spoilers. I mean, they're all spoilers. They're all spoilers.
Yeah, I was like, we should have set a warning at the very beginning.
But I love that. I really did like how Colleen wrote that scene with Alyssa when Alyssa finds out about the abuse. She's like, as your friend, you need to leave him.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
I won't be your friend anymore if you stay with them.
Yeah.
As his sister, of course, I would want you to take him back. And I thought, I mean, honestly, I mean, I really do praise Colleen Hoover. I think she just, as I said, such a sensitive topic, and she really brings so many different layers to it, because it really is. There's so many different layers to it.
Yeah.
And Ryle was in therapy too his whole life. So
yeah, he does mention that he's in therapy, though not in anger management, which is an interesting aspect of that journey.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, therapist, and the makeup therapist in the book is like, how could you miss that? Right.
I don't know how they are sending him to anger management classes.
Yeah.
But I think we should probably, since we've talked a bit about Ryle and Alyssa and Lily, I think we should bring in the third wheel here. And
that's right. And I also love this too, because it brings another layer to it. So Atlas.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where Colleen came up with these names. Ryle, Atlas.
I read, so Atlas is, I mean, it has something to do with maps, right? And like, I was reading somewhere that, basically, I think the meaning of his name is that he goes on like this long journey, and like he ultimately only wants to end up with Lily. And it's like this brooding character of, he has like a lot of traumatic experiences as well. And so I think that's what his name symbolizes,
Okay.
is that journey that he
Okay.
goes on.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
we're
interesting.
introduced to Atlas with flashbacks with Lily's
Mm-hmm.
teenage
Mhm.
years, and there again, I think that it was very well done because flashbacks can be challenging in books
Yeah.
sometimes. But I think Colleen did a very good job of introducing Atlas. So he is, when Lily meets him, he's a homeless teenager. He's
Mhm.
2 years older than Lily, I believe. I think she's a sophomore in high school and he's a senior.
Mhm.
So he's been kicked out of his house, and Lily sees that. So there's an abandoned home across the street, I believe it is.
Behind
Or
her house.
Mhm.
They
is it
share a
behind her
They
house?
share a backyard.
Okay, they
Yeah.
share a backyard.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And her bedroom like overlooks the house.
That's right. So she sees that he is going into this house, and so she realizes that he perhaps needs some help. So she
Mhm.
brings him some food, and they develop this relationship. So, but so let's dive into this question. Why do you think Lily helped Atlas when helping him had tremendous potential to cause trouble with her friends and her parents? Because he's a homeless boy in an abandoned house, and
Mhm.
then she decides to befriend him. So,
Yeah.
which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
I think, well, Atlas was my favorite character
Mhm.
in all of
Yeah.
this. And I mean, I know a lot of people were like, oh, wanted her to end up with Ryle. And I was like, no, I'm like,
Mhm.
no, I never wanted her to end up with Ryle.
Mhm.
But I think that we see Lily throughout this entire book. She has this like angelic persona that Colleen Hoover
Mhm.
displays like in her character.
Yeah.
And I think also it was maybe an outlet for her to connect with someone outside of her home
Mhm.
with all of the abuse that was happening.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think that's why maybe she ultimately helped him.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think the way I sort of perceived that was that, so, oh, well, so Lily is probably my least favorite character in this whole book.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Because she doesn't have any flaws. I
yeah.
mean,
And
you brought it up.
I think it
Colleen
was
really
kind of,
paints her honestly flawlessly.
yeah. And even if we get inside Lily's head and we hear about her own, feelings, which give her flaws and make her feel more human, the way that Colleen Hoover has written the obsession that these two men have for Lily
Mhm.
feels um like too much to me. I don't know how
It
else
felt
to
a little
explain it.
unrealistic.
Yeah, like
Yes.
they're so obsessed with her and they feel like she's the be all end all of everything. And when
Yeah.
when she meets Alice, like they're teenagers and we all know what teenage love feels like. It's very over the top.
Mm-hmm.
But even then when she's with Ryle and they're in their 20s, same thing kind of. I don't know, maybe I'm coming at this from a perspective of having lived through these very like um, it's the end of the world if we don't stay together kinds of relationships where when you get older you realize that there's more things to a relationship than like the
Right.
obsession part. So but I do think that and this might have had something to do too, and I will give this to the audiobook, is that I listened to it and I think the narrator, I think some of the ways that she read the book from the male perspective, I feel like her voice gave their voice too much weight. And I'm not sure if that would have been different with a different narrator. And therefore, I might have
Mhm.
less of a feeling that these two men independently thought that Lily was like the best thing since sliced bread kind of thing.
Mhm.
Right.
But going back
Right.
to my thoughts on her taking care of Atlas, I really feel like in a situation like her home life where she's an only child,
Mm-hmm.
her father's abusive and distant,
Mm-hmm.
her mother is basically from Lily's perspective, her mother is basically choosing to stay in an abusive relationship with her father
Mhm.
instead of choosing Lily and moving out and being safe, right?
Right.
Mhm.
So when you're growing up in a situation like that where your mother, the person who you feel is there to protect you, is
Mhm.
choosing this abusive situation
Yes.
over taking care of you,
Yes,
there is this loneliness that
there is.
sets in
Mhm.
that I think Lily addresses, that loneliness and that need for nourishment,
Yes, and I
both
also
physically and mentally. I think that she transfers that to Atlas because
yes,
she's like, here's this
He
guy
needs
who,
more help than I need.
right, because he
that's
doesn't
right.
Yeah.
even have one parent who's
That's
helping
right.
him. He's all by himself.
And
So,
also, it's someone new in her life because she's keeping a secret. I mean, she's
mhm,
keeping her parents'
Mm-hmm.
secret. I mean, her mother's keeping the secret, but
yeah,
of her husband, but Lily is keeping her family secret.
right,
When she can't
So,
tell her other friends at
right?
school,
right.
So that has got to be a very lonely place. So
Yeah.
maybe she saw this as an opportunity. It's like, hey, she did see him in the same school, the same high school. She did know that he went there, but they didn't really have any circles of friends together.
But
So it's
also,
somebody completely new.
I'm not sure that Lily even really had friends either.
That
They
could
like
be.
she really seemed like she kept herself at a distance because of her
Mhm.
family
Yeah.
secret.
Which
Yeah.
I think probably
She
does
never talks
happen.
about there's no
Mhm.
flashbacks to having, go like hanging out with girlfriends
Right.
or doing anything. The only sense that we get of the other girls in her life are the scenes where she's on the bus
Right.
befriending Atlas and the girls on the bus are making fun of her because he
Mhm.
Right.
stinks
Yeah.
or.
Yes.
So she
Yeah.
seems like a loner in a lot of ways. And
Yeah.
so here he comes and
She could be.
he needs more help than, and she can give him something because she does
Mhm.
have something to give him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And he gives her something in return. He gives her,
Right.
a friendship that she
Yes.
doesn't have in
Mhm.
any other way. And she can be herself with him,
Yeah.
Mhm.
so that's huge.
Mhm. And they
So,
do develop this very deep
mhm.
bond. And we do see that even when she was married to Ryle, so she did have some mementos from Atlas and she
Yes.
kept them her entire life, which actually then turns into a very traumatic scene with Ryle is because of those mementos. But why do you suppose she kept those mementos?
I mean, I feel like I would have kept those mementos
Mhm.
as well. I mean, obviously, it was even if she didn't ultimately end up with Atlas or, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
she wanted to remember him. I mean, that was a very
Yes.
pivotal part
Part
of
of her
her
life.
life.
It was.
And like we
Mhm.
just mentioned, he was really her only friend,
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Mhm. And
we do learn, I don't know if we want to dive into this, but she doesn't really, when she gets older, she doesn't really know where he ended up, if he was,
right, because he came well, the last scene that we see of Atlas, so Lily and Atlas developed this relationship, and then so he was kicked out of his home because his mother did she get married? I can't remember now. Was she
She was
married?
married to a man.
She
Mhm.
got married to a
Mhm.
man that didn't want Ryle around.
Mhm.
yeah,
So basically, it was like, she
Didn't
chose,
want Atlas.
right?
So he was basically jealous
Yeah,
of
so the mom
Atlas.
chose the new husband over Atlas. How
hmm
devastating is that when he was in a senior in high school?
yeah,
So then he was in this abandoned house, and then that's when he developed the relationship with Lily. But then he went to live with an uncle in
in
Boston.
Boston.
So everything's better in Boston, right? And so that's actually one of the mementos that she keeps, and that's just something that they talk about. That, and I really love the line, "Keep swimming,
She
Yeah.
keep
does keep
swimming,"
swimming.
which
From
is
Finding Dory.
Finding
I
Dory.
think,
Finding Nemo.
what was, I mean, I feel like this, maybe it's not overlooked, but, I feel like Lily always wanted to be with Atlas. I mean, the
Yeah,
girl moved to Boston
she
Yes.
did.
and opened up her business in
Right.
Boston,
Yeah.
and even when she ends up running into him,
Right.
again in Boston,
Yes.
he's like, "What are you doing here? Are you visiting?" And she's like, "Oh no, I live here now." It's like, okay, well,
Yeah,
Right.
we actually kind of learned that it was Ryle kind of got in the way. She had devised her life. She went off to college,
Mhm.
and after college she moved to Boston
Mhm.
in the hopes, I think, of finding Atlas. And even though we don't know how hard she tried to find him, we do know that she went on social media looking for him.
yeah,
Right.
But
Right.
he didn't have any accounts or anything, so she never found him that route.
Right.
But I do think that it's worth bringing up in the question of keeping mementos from your past.
Mhm.
The big device that Colleen Hoover uses to give us the flashbacks. So Lily's father dies.
Mhm.
Lily goes back home for her father's funeral, and while she's at home, she picks up some old shoe boxes that have her diaries from when she was a
Mhm.
teenager.
That's
Right.
right.
So this is the device that Colleen Hoover uses to get us going into these flashbacks because Lily is rereading for the first time in presumably at least 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
she's rereading these diaries that she had written. And instead of writing a sort of dear diary, such and such happened today, she's writing her diary as if each entry was a letter to Ellen DeGeneres. So we kind of have this pop culture sensibility to her diary writing, but she's also writing about these very heady topics in her relationship with Atlas and what happens with her mom and dad. So it's a clever device to get us to flashback. I think it works out really well. And I think that the fact that this is where Ryle, whatever compassion I might have for him, starts to fade in the book for me, is because I think when you marry an adult, they bring their past with them, and whether or not they have physical mementos of their life when they were like to be mad at somebody for for keeping that and having that is a very childish and really not cool thing.
Exactly.
And I think really annoyed me.
I think to Ryle's point, I guess, she was probably looking for there to be more with Atlas. So I do see both sides in the sense of, I think that the mementos were kept probably because she ultimately wanted to end up with him and find him. And like you said, we don't know how long she tried to find him, but but yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's like, he has no, if you love someone, then just let them have the memento, just let them have it.
I have all kinds of mementos from past relationships and past lives and things like that.
Exactly.
And these aren't things that my current husband would, get so mad that he pushes me down the stairs over if he saw me looking at them one day. Do you know what I mean? Because ultimately those are things I'm actually going to share with him. Because look who I was when I was 25.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
Exactly.
Well, there again, I'll put air quotes, in a normal, stable relationship, you're not going to be jealous of your spouse's past. But why don't we take a look at this then? So, because Lily did marry Ryle knowing he had anger management problems, why do you think she ignores the signs, especially since Atlas had also reappeared in her life?
Yeah, this boggled me a little bit.
I know, right?
I think I think this is kind of where the writing, I think it's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, well, obviously she can't pursue him because then there wouldn't be a book.
Right.
The end.
The end.
I know. Goes back to the restaurant where Atlas works.
But I know, right? I also think a part of it was that he mentioned, she, said, are you seeing anyone? And he goes, I'm seeing a girl named Cassie. And so I think, to be fair, on her side of it, she's probably thinking, okay, well, he's in a relationship. I'm in a relationship. This is how it's supposed to be. We're just supposed to be friends. And I think she just kind of leaves it at that. And she doesn't pursue it any further than that.
And at the time, she is very obsessed with Ryle. I mean, their relationship is honestly, it's very hot and heavy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's meeting her mom for the first time when they see him,
That's right.
When they see Atlas, when she sees Atlas again for the first time.
Yes.
So it's like, this guy is meeting my mom. My mom loves him. They're very hot and heavy in that point in their relationship. I also feel like this comes a little while before they actually get married. So then if the question is why did she go through with marrying him? I think to Chelsea's point, the author does establish that she does find Atlas again, but he's in a relationship, and as far as she knows, they're happy and they've been together a year, and so things are going along.
Right.
But I also think that Lily has, I got the sense from her character that she has a stick-to-itiveness, that
loyalty,
and kind of I'm in this thing, I'm going to see it through. I've committed to this person, or I've committed to this, job, or whatever it is, and I think that she's got a loyalty there that, and even though in her heart of hearts, her loyalty might actually still be with Atlas, she's not really free to discover that yet.
And I think
there has been a significant amount of time between she was 15 and she's 24 in the book. So it's almost 10 years. Yeah. So that's quite a bit of your life that you've lived without your, your first love. And I think your first love is always very special. I do.
Yeah. I think that just, to Ryle's point as well, just briefly talking in regards to the mementos, because I just want to to bring this up, but she had the tattoo on her collarbone, and I think that and it was like the half open heart, which obviously symbolized the memento that Atlas gave to her, the physical, oak tree one,
Right.
and
Which was a heart.
which was a heart. And I think that multiple times throughout the book, Ryle says to her, "Oh, why do you have this?" Or like, "Where, what does this mean?"
Right.
Yeah.
And she continuously lies. And I think, like you just said, if you did have mementos, that's something that you would just share, like, "Hey, this was when I was 25. And it's like, why don't you just say,
Right.
"I got this"?
Why wasn't she honest
Yeah,
about it
she wasn't honest.
with
And
Ryle?
so I'm not saying that deserved for her to be pushed down the stairs,
No.
but had he approached that in an actual non-physical way, I could understand why he'd be upset by that,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
she was continuously lying about it, but
That's
Well,
right.
she didn't lie so much as she just omitted the
Right.
omitted. Yeah.
truth,
Which is
but
omission is just it's really the same.
it
I
is,
think.
it is, but
Omission.
also,
Yeah.
also from her perspective,
Because when you're
she's
when you're presented with a question like that, where did you
Sure.
get it?
Sure,
Yeah.
but from her perspective, like on the one hand, she's like, "Oh, it's just something that I did when I was in college, just a silly thing, whatever."
Yeah.
Which is true. It's a half truth.
But also
Yeah.
from her perspective, like how is she to know at that point that, that the real reason behind it would have any consequence whatsoever? Honestly, like,
Yeah.
there's literally no way for her at that point when she says that to Ryle that he would ever find the box with the heart in it and then read the journal entry where she
That's true.
explains why and how she got
Yeah.
or where that came from,
That's right.
So from her perspective, it's just kind of like, oh, it's just one of those things that you do when you're young or whatever. Had she maybe thought, oh, well, I have evidence of it being otherwise,
Right.
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. I don't know.
Yes. Well, let's talk about, before we get into the movie, I think this question will segue very nicely into talking about the movie, because right now we're just focused on the book, and the book does cover very sensitive topics. And do you think that Colleen Hoover handled these in a very sensitive way, or do you think she could have painted it even more sensitive? I guess, because I think that if there are any questions about Colleen Hoover, it's that she wasn't very even-handed with this topic. I personally think that she was. I think she handled it in a very sensitive way. But
I
so what
felt
do you
she
think?
was, but I mean, maybe I'm not the best person to answer this because I haven't experienced domestic violence. But I felt she was. But what do you?
I felt like it was actually a pretty, like, honest accounting of what could have happened in a situation. Like, it seemed very believable and realistic to me. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't actually feel like it was, it wasn't like so graphic that I had to put it down,
Right.
but it also, I feel like painted a very, for that girl in that situation and that moment and those things, like I didn't think that it seemed heavy-handed in one way or the other. It all felt very believable and realistic to me.
Yeah.
I thought so too. And that's why I particularly liked the ending of the story, because Lily does get pregnant with Ryle's child and she has the baby, and that's how the book is well, no, actually that's not quite the ending, but that's the pivotal point towards the ending. But she makes a very hard decision right after giving birth that she's not going to go back with Ryle. And I thought that was absolutely beautifully written, because Lily really grew up, made a very black and white decision that she did love Ryle. Had nothing to do with her love for him, but it had everything to do with her love for her new daughter.
Yeah.
And so I really thought that was a really beautifully written scene.
Yeah. And that was her choosing her daughter over him when she always felt like her mom did the opposite.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was a very hard decision to make, especially because what a beautiful occasion, and Ryle was there and helped her through the birth, and then and then she makes this pivotal decision. And then also too, then we find out I did not know until I had finished the book and then read more about Colleen that this actually, her mother left her father. She was in an abusive relationship and left her father when I think Colleen was like 3.
Mm-hmm.
So this book really has a lot of personal meaning for Colleen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So and I also so I was like, my hat was off to Colleen's mom for there again making that very hard decision
Mhm.
that many women struggle with, and like we saw in the book, Lily's mom could never do that.
Yeah.
She
Yeah,
never did that.
for sure.
So we did see that Lily did break the cycle, and I was very glad. So I think that that's a very positive note for domestic violence,
Mhm.
domestic abuse victims to see.
Yeah.
So I did like that. So now let's go over to this really controversial. Boy, is this movie controversial. I mean, I can't go over to any social media, especially
I know.
YouTube, without having it
Being
ends with
bombarded.
us. Yes, splashed across,
Yeah.
either a YouTube thumbnail or
Mm-hmm.
something going on. So, and the movie, but when we are filming this, the movie's been out for about a week or so. And we've all
Yes.
seen the movie.
That's
We've
right.
all seen the movie.
We have.
I-
So, well, I just want to say, speaking of, because I feel like this kind of segues into, the question that, just saying that this covers a sensitive topic,
Mhm.
the book does.
Mhm.
So when me and Andrew went and saw the movie,
Mhm.
Andrew has not read the book.
Mhm.
So he had no context as to what this was about.
Right.
He just knew that we were going to see a
Mhm.
movie. I think he just assumed, oh, it's, a rom-com.
Mhm.
The first scene breaks out where, Lily, basically he's pulling the hot pot out of the
Yeah.
Oven.
or the hot pan out of the oven and hits her.
Mhm.
And Andrew, like for 15 minutes go on, and then he looks at me and he goes, am I missing something here?
Uh-huh.
Because obviously they make it
Right.
look like this accident.
Accident. Yeah.
Right.
And they kept doing that. And I think probably about halfway through the movie, he looks at me, he goes, I am just so confused.
Mhm.
Like, I don't understand why people are making a big deal out of this. Like,
Yes.
is this movie about domestic violence? And I was like,
Yes.
it is.
Should be.
Yeah.
It should have been.
But I was like, I can see how someone that didn't read the book,
That's
he
right.
didn't know until the very end.
That's
Yeah.
right. I know. And that's what that was my big bone of contention with this book is they did not touch on the domestic violence as they should have.
Well, I feel like they didn't set it up correctly at
Yeah.
all. Like I
Mhm.
recognize that the device that they used with making those instances of Ryle being violent toward Lily ambiguous, because I think that, and this is my own thought.
Mhm.
I feel like with the movie, they were trying to convey her sense of confusion. 'Cause,
Yes.
she wakes up from each of these
That's what it
instances
was.
and she's
Yeah.
like,
Right.
did he hit me? Because he's telling her she fell.
Right.
He's telling her that, it was an accident. She fell.
Yeah.
He got
Right.
put, whatever. So she's in the book having these confused feelings.
Yes.
I feel like that's how they tried to approach that in the movie.
But we knew in the book what happened.
Right. But I
Yes.
That's
think
the difference.
why the movie fails to really convey that in a true sense. So the
Mhm.
example that you mentioned with Andrew is exactly what I'm like, if you didn't have the context of the book, you would be like, what the hell's going on here? I feel like for the movie, they should have spent more time establishing her thoughts and feelings
Mhm.
and establishing Lily as a character
Right.
Yeah.
before we even get to that point, because
That's
Oh,
right.
for sure.
they could have had a much more straightforward
Mhm.
situation
Mhm.
on film than what happened. Because I'll just say I did not like this movie. I was incredibly disappointed with how they handled
I was
making
so
it.
disappointed. I gave it 2 thumbs down.
Yeah.
2, not 1, 2.
I felt like it was long, but
It's very long.
well, I thought it was long, but it didn't give anything.
Mhm.
Like, I'm like, how can a movie be so long,
I know.
but there's no context to where, Andrew's over there. He doesn't even know this is about domestic violence.
Yeah.
And that is what has been at play in the social media world is that this is a domestic violence book. It touches on that. I think it was portrayed very sensitively. I think Colleen wrote about it brilliantly. I really do. I mean, she's not a brilliant writer, but she really handled this topic very well. But the book, it did not translate to the book at
No.
all. And so now there's like this big fallout. So this is what I really wanted to touch about because
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
talking about the movie and all the tea that's being spilled. So I guess there's a huge um with there's a feud, or maybe feud is like too uh big of a word to bandy about, but
I think it's a feud.
there's been a s- very significant line drawn in the sand between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively.
Okay, so he's the director and the
So
character
yes,
or the
so
actor that
Justin
plays Ryle.
Baldoni is the director of this movie and plays Ryle, the lead, and he's actually the one that bought the rights
Oh, really?
to
Oh, I didn't know
Colleen
that.
Hoover's book. So everybody was all chummy until like 2 months before the movie premiere, and that was one of the first things that I noticed because I had just read the book, and then I was aware that there was a movie, and then on the press junket, I was like, why is the director and the lead actor not in the same room answering all the questions as everybody else? So that was my first,
Mm.
red flag. So then,
They both from my perspective, and I don't know why Colleen Hoover would even agree to this on some of the
Mhm,
press, interviews,
mhm.
but I felt like Blake very much made this movie seem like a rom-com. Like she's like, grab your
Yes,
girlfriends, wear your florals, eat your popcorn.
Really?
Like she literally says that verbatim. And
yes.
Colleen Hoover is sitting right there and it's like,
Mhm,
so I mean, I think even Andrew is like, oh, we're going to see a
mhm,
rom-com.
Mhm.
mhm.
But then Justin Baldoni, he in every interview is like talking about the domestic violence.
Exactly.
And so I don't really know why that is. And
Mhm.
you would think that Colleen Hoover would be more on Justin's side.
Right,
That's the confusing part to me because I don't
right,
understand that. But
right.
um
Or, when the camps divide and you actually have to make a decision, maybe I mean, who knows, why she decided to go with Blake, but Blake was the bigger star, I'm guessing.
I
So
felt
I
I'm
don't
gonna be
know.
honest, I
That would
think
be a
Blake
hard.
ruined this movie.
She did.
Yeah.
She did. I'm sorry.
She was not the right choice for Lily. I wish that they would have picked a nobody
Mm-hmm.
for Lily because
Mm-hmm.
you know who I really enjoyed watching was the flashbacks in the movie. That was the only
I
part of
know
the movie that I
the
enjoyed.
young
The
Lily
young
and
Lily.
Alice.
Yeah.
They were the only ones that
I
and even
agree.
Andrew said that he was like, I actually really enjoyed watching the
Mhm.
flashbacks. And he's like, besides that, it was
Yeah.
Yes.
terrible.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do, and I will lay blame at Blake Lively's doorstep. And my understanding is that she and Ryan rewrote several of the scenes. So, and
That's what I heard as well.
I'm sure that would be when you're a director, and then somebody comes along and has completely
Well,
rewritten a scene.
especially if he's the one that bought the rights
Yes, right.
to it. Like
I
I
know.
don't really understand. It sounds
I
like a little bit
know.
of a train wreck and it was all kind of
I think
messy.
so. Yes, but everybody's, supposedly everything was fine until about 2 months before the premiere, and then that's when you really saw the camps really
Yeah.
divided. And I even the last thing that I heard was that Justin Baldoni hired the attorney that represented Johnny Depp.
Really.
Hmm. Yes, so
I mean, I think
I thought that was pretty interesting
I
right
do
there.
think what has happened is I think that Justin Baldoni, from seeing him in interviews, I think that he wanted things to go very differently. And like
Yes,
you said, Blake kind of
yes,
came in
yes. They kind of
and she
steamrolled
made it
things
about like
with Ryan.
fashion.
With
She was like, that's all she
Mhm.
talks about in the interviews is what she was wearing.
Really.
Oh no,
I imagine Lily as a
She's
character
matching.
that was just,
No, that was really
plain Jane.
that was kind of annoying. Yes, wear your florals and come see the movie
I'm just
because
like, what is happening? But
because
yeah.
of Lily Bloom. Well, now there are quite a few interviews of Blake where you really see that she's tone deaf because there was one interview of her. The reporter asked her, "Listen, there are going to be domestic violence victims
Hmm.
that might want to, they've seen this movie, they might want to reach out to you. How would you like to do that?" She's like so flip about that. She's like,
She
she
goes,
didn't
what are
even,
they going to ask for my phone number
oh,
and my
we can share,
location?
we can share our
And the
location.
address.
It was just like, and you could see some Brandon Spinar, I think
He
that's his
rolled his
name. He
eyes.
rolled his eyes. It was pretty funny.
Yeah.
It was pretty
Well,
funny.
so there, Blake is just the downfall of her is that could be an entire another
Well,
episode
Yeah.
it
of,
really is. And now they're backpedaling. So
yeah.
now her PR team is coming out and then addressing like, yes, this movie is about domestic violence. And I think now they've probably put a little bit of a muzzle on Blake. I don't think she's giving any more interviews.
That's
And
probably good.
mhm,
I, ca-
I think it's very good.
I think it's just too bad though that this book was
Yes.
really ripe for a very good movie version of it, and it's just
Oh yeah.
It could
It
have
could have
been.
been.
It
Yeah.
could
I
have
read the
been.
book and I cried.
they
I
ruined it.
know.
I watched the movie and I did not shed one tear.
No,
How
the
I
book
was
was
just angry
so
at the movie.
touching. The book was
Yeah.
so touching to me. And as I said, I felt that Colleen really took a very challenging topic
Mm-hmm.
and wrote about it beautifully, sensitively. And I love the ending too, because Lily does get together with Atlas, but months later. In the movie, I think it's years later, but in the book,
Yeah.
it's really months later. And I love that. I love the whole. I really like the whole trajectory of
Yeah.
that romance. I did, and it was very satisfying. I mean, you really. I mean, as a reader, you want a satisfying ending. In a movie, you want that same satisfying ending, and I just didn't feel
yeah.
the movie delivered at all.
No.
Just at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thumbs down for the movie.
Yeah. 2 thumbs down for the movie.
But
Don't
read the
Read
book.
the book. Read the
Yeah.
book.
The book is good.
It is.
And I say that because
enjoyed it.
I'm normally not a love story kind of, this isn't a love story, but like obviously it's domestic violence, but
Yes.
romance
Yes.
is not normally my genre of
Right.
pick.
Mhm.
I'm normally more of a thriller,
Right.
but I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I liked
I
it.
did too. It
So-
was a very timely book. Okay, ladies. Well, we're going to take a quick break and we will be back with New and Noteworthy, where we share a product, or maybe it's a movie, TV show, something that we've discovered this past week. And we're back with New and Noteworthy. So, Kelly, I'll kick it off to you this week. So, what'd you find?
Okay, so this conversation that we just had about It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover,
Mhm.
I actually jumped right into the second book of this. I don't know, is it a two-part series?
Mhm.
So book 2 is called It Starts With Us.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a little bit like Lily Bloom from the
Mhm.
first book. I have a stick-to-itiveness. I like to know if there's a part 2 and I enjoyed the first one, I'm gonna probably read the
Mhm.
second one.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, and I liked it because it really gave, I won't give any spoilers, but I do feel like this book 2 really ties everything up in a beautiful way,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I like that.
Mm-hmm.
This book is shorter than the first book.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that if you, I had some bones to pick with the narrator from the first book for the audio version.
Mm-hmm.
And for this next one, the same female narrator reads for Lily's parts, but there's a male voice actor that reads male parts, which I thought was a very, very
That's
good
nice that they
choice.
did that.
Yeah.
I really liked that because I think I had some kind of false feelings about some of the male characters in the first book based on the way that the narrator
Mhm.
read their parts. So I'm really glad
Wow.
that that this new version, or I'm sorry, this second book has this
Mhm.
narration style with 2 different people.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoyed
Nice.
it.
Well, good. I'm going to read it. And also, too, so this is interesting. So when I was in a book club and we would talk about the books, and many times we would ask people, okay, did they listen to it? Was it an audible
Mhm.
book, an audio book, or did they actually read it? And
Right.
sometimes you can have a completely different perspective of a
Mhm.
book based on the narrator.
I don't know how you guys listen to books. I have tried.
Uh-huh.
I have to read them.
Yeah.
Feel like I have ADHD where I'll
Mhm.
just start doing something and then I realize I've
Yes.
missed 7 pages.
That does happen.
It does
I
happen.
will say.
It
But I have
can.
like very specific things that I'm doing, like when I'm in the car, like
Mm.
traveling.
Yeah.
I always have an audiobook with me, or if I have if I'm going to the airport, things like that.
Mhm.
But that is the downfall of an audiobook, at least for me, because I will, like, if I do get engaged in something else, I'm like, oh shoot, where did I,
Where did I leave
You're
it?
like, I don't remember.
yeah, you typically don't do that, but I mean, although I've been guilty of that, like, flipping through pages and still
Well,
not retaining what I just read.
But I think it's
So-
also just important to know like how you're a learner. So I'm a better auditory
Mhm.
learner. Like I retain more information by hearing it than by reading it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
so it works for me in that
Yeah.
sense because
Yeah.
I don't retain information as well when I'm just reading it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And for me, it's more of just a time crunch. So I don't have the physical time like I did in years gone by to sit down and read a book. And if I do it like when I was younger, I would always read before I went to bed. But now, I mean, I like fall asleep. I'm like halfway down the page and I fall asleep. So that's out. But anyway,
if you're the kind of person who likes to have your stories wrapped up in a nice clean bow, I would recommend finishing with
That's nice. I'm going to do that. I'm going to read that, especially because I read the book, loved it, went to the movie, hated it. So I want to wrap it up. I want to wrap it up.
Redemption.
That's right. I want redemption. So I'm gonna read it.
Yeah.
Okay. So Chelsea, what do you have for this?
Mine's also a book, and I read it a few years ago. It's called The Silent Patient, and it's by, I'm gonna completely butcher this last name, but Alex Michaelides.
Sounds good.
It's a psychological thriller, which is my genre of book choice, and it basically follows the story of this woman who kills her husband and then stops speaking.
Very interesting.
And yeah, I mean, there's obviously way more to the story, unexpected twist and all that, but don't want to give it away.
No.
It's a really good book.
Don't give you spoilers away for books that we haven't discussed.
Yes. So. No. I mean, you find out this information, the murdering of the husband, right from the get-go. Right. But it was a really good book. I enjoyed it. It does really keep you on the edge of your seat. So if you want a thriller.
I always like a good book. And maybe this is something that we'll add on to the podcast more often, because I think it's always fun to take a look at books. Books are very special to me, and I would love to do that. So we'll definitely have to think about that. And then also too, there are actual podcasts that talk just about books, so we can go over and take a look at how they do it, how what their format is. I just picked out the questions just like I would for a regular book club. So, but maybe podcast wise, maybe there's different techniques. But my new and noteworthy this week is also a book. So, and this is also coming out as a limited series in September, and it's starring Nicole Kidman. But the book it's called The Perfect Couple by Elin Hilderbrand, who is the queen of beach reads. Yeah. So, and Nicole Kidman usually picks really good limited series. So I'm thinking that it's going to be very good, but and I'm not going to give too much away, but suffice it to say there's a wedding, a murder, and lots of mayhem in Nantucket only hours before the wedding ceremony. So, and there again, I'll be very interested to see how the book is adapted into the limited series. Right. So, okay, ladies, well, that wraps up another episode of Message for Mom, where we're busting the myth that mothers-in-law aren't necessarily monsters-in-law.